mindful of how we judge people, because I think a lot of times we judge homelessness in association with addiction, but a lot of our mothers do not struggle with addiction. They struggle with bad choices and relationships and generational trauma as well. And to treat those mothers the same way that you would want your daughter or your son to be treated if they were in need of any type of help, and to continue to pray for them as well, because the journey that they've just started is definitely probably one of the hardest journeys that they've ever been on, but it will be the most fulfilling journey if they continue to walk with Jesus.
And welcome to Miracles from the Hill podcast, where we share raw stories that display the anatomy of God's grace here at Miracle Hill Ministries. If this is your first time joining us, please subscribe. And of course, you can like, comment, and leave a review. To connect with us, visit our website linked in the description box. And now, here is our host, Ryan Dirk.
Greetings, listeners, and welcome back to the Miracles from the Hill podcast. We are deep in season 3, where we are digging deep into the experience of homelessness, specifically for children. And we are blessed today to have Sam Littlejohn with us. Good morning, Sam.
Good morning, Ryan.
I'm so excited to have you here. So Sam's been on staff at our Cherokee County Rescue Mission for 6 years. She's the women's counselor, case manager, program manager, some title that encompasses all those 3 things, and is kind of responsible for half the building up there. And Absolutely. Part of that equation occasionally is children. So we're going to jump in. Good morning, Sam.
Good morning, Ryan.
How in the world did you wind up working at the Cherokee County Rescue Mission?
It's a funny story, because I actually left the position that I was in and was planning to be a stay-at-home mom for just a little bit. At the time, we had some healthcare issues with a grandmother, and I was going to stay home with her for a little bit. And I heard about the position at Miracle Hill, and I applied immediately and met with Merle and Barbara the next day.
Really?
Absolutely.
And you went right in full-time?
I did. I met with them the next day. 2 days after that, I came and I met with Bill Slocum, and I started within the same week.
Really? So what was it about that job that made you jump to an application?
Because it was ministry work.
Because it was ministry work.
Absolutely.
Well, that presupposes that you know Jesus. So how'd you meet him?
I don't ever remember a time not knowing Jesus. I was adopted at the age of about 6 months old, and from that point on, like into my childhood, I always knew that God had a calling on my life, because he placed me with an awesome family. And I felt like at that time, like Jesus was beginning the great work in my life, and I became baptized at about the age of 10 and have been in church ever since then.
Okay. So the job posting lets you know that it's ministry, but did you have any experience helping people experiencing homelessness prior to that, or even interacting with people experiencing homelessness?
I did. Prior to that, I worked at DHEC in HIV prevention case management for the state, and I actually worked with a lot of homelessness due to HIV and drug addiction.
Okay. So you get to Cherokee County, and you know, it's different from previous jobs.
Absolutely.
So what were some of like the early lessons you learned?
The early lesson was that I had never worked in Cherokee County, and had always said that I would never work in Cherokee County because it's such a small county where everybody knows everybody. Within the first week of being at Miracle Hill, I had 3 classmates that were there at the mission.
Wow.
And that was tough. Same
age as you?
Absolutely. Graduated high school with me, went together through school from like elementary all the way through.
So what is your what's your mind telling you when you're interacting with people that you sat in classes with all those years ago?
I think I was really bumfuzzled like the first week, because it was hard for them to recognize me in a counselor role versus the Sam from high school. and the same that had a relationship with the Lord as well. And for the majority of them, they say that my personality had not changed because I always had Jesus within my life. But I think a lot of my qualities had changed. I was a lot more assertive in my relationship with the Lord and the way that I was ministering to other people.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but so you fast forward 6 years, and now where there was that rub with those classmates, now they know to call Sam if they need help.
Absolutely. That was difficult. I remember having the three of them there at the same time, and they were kind of a rowdy bunch, if you would say. And I think for me, it was seeing them in a different venue than I had from high school. Mm-hmm. They were much more in the world of addiction, and that was certainly such a stronghold in their life. And for me to be able to break that barrier and to actually reach the surface, it was hard.
But with God, there's a way, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Two of those ladies are now doing really, really well and have worked in their job for like 2 years and are actually reunited with their families and are actually still committed to the church home that they established at Miracle Hill and are doing really well.
Good. So what is the Cherokee County Rescue Mission?
The Cherokee County Rescue Mission, formerly known as the Harbor of Hope for all of us Cherokee County people, is actually a homeless shelter, and we do have men and women. That's one of the unique things about Cherokee County is we do service men and women. We have the women that are populated on one side, the men that are populated on another side, but we do service children as well.
Okay, so that is unique, right? People don't think about that often when they think about the experience of homelessness. They have in their mind the guy with the wine bottle in a paper bag and the shopping cart, but the reality is that it affects all different types of people, and probably more frequently than people recognize. A mom shows up with her kids. So what does it mean to have children in the mission? Like, who's coming in with children? What kind of children? Things like that.
Generally, we have moms that come in with children. We haven't necessarily had a lot of experience with fathers that are coming in with children, but generally it's moms, and that age can vary from 18 to maybe around in their mid-30s that have small children that are in the building. We have had a mom that has had up to 9 children with us in the building.
Really?
Absolutely, and that was one mom with 9 children.
And there's an age range on what we'll accept. What's the age range on kids?
For children, we will accept any children with a mom that is up to the age from birth up until 18. If the person is just a male child, we will not accept male children over the age of 9 because it is community living and it is shared space.
And that becomes awkward when the boy reaches puberty and
Absolutely.
There's other women in the room. So that means that this woman had 9 children.
Absolutely.
A lot of girls, I'm guessing.
It was a balance. It was a lot of girls and a lot of boys. They were like stair steps. It was like every year she had a child, and I think her youngest at that time was around 2 months old.
Wow. So she's got 9 kids. I'm not trying to get off on the story, but we're going to a little bit. So she's got 9 kids of various ages and a baby. Mm-hmm. How does she find stability in her life?
Well, the number one barrier for most women that have children is childcare. And in order to work, you have to have childcare if all of your children aren't of school-bearing age and can attend school at that time. So that's a major conflict for us because we don't provide childcare for them. We try to establish a relationship with DSS that can provide an avenue so that they can have childcare, which is the ABC voucher. With the ABC voucher, it's a government-funded program that will provide childcare for the parent in a childcare setting for up to 2 years due to the COVID epidemic. If that happens, the mother can work, and all the money that she's able to sustain at that time is her money because it's not going towards childcare.
So when you have mothers with children come in, are there like an age range that you see more often in the kids? Generally,
there's 2 age ranges that we see. It's either infant children, which would be around the age of birth up until about 6 months old, or school age children.
Okay, so the older they are, the more likely they're going to be somewhere else.
Absolutely.
Why do you think that is?
I think because people are more willing to help with children that are able to do things for themselves. It's harder to have help when you have a newborn that you're basically providing the 24-hour care for.
Yeah. And how long do these mothers with children usually stay?
Generally, that's a tough one because of circumstances regarding employment and housing. They can stay in our building up to 6 months or more. Now, with an extension being granted to them, that would mean that they are actually working and actually the children are enrolled in school or they're in daycare, and she's actually making progress towards being the healthiest version of herself. But if the mother is just physically there in the mission and not making any progress, it can be up to 90 days.
Okay. And do you see a difference between the single women and the women with children as far as how long they stay?
Absolutely. Generally, the single women will transition out a lot faster. It's easier for them to get employment. It's easier for them to work different shifts. Whereas with a mother, it's almost like a first shift set schedule that she would need to accommodate her children. So it's a little bit tougher for that mother.
Yeah. And the barriers for stability are not as high when you don't have to think about other human beings.
Absolutely.
When you're just thinking about yourself. So you talked about the lady who's got the 9 kids, and she had a 2-month-old with her, but we've had younger kids than that. Do you have a story about those?
We did. We have had a baby that was actually born at the mission. And it was a crazy story because this mother had come to us and wasn't exactly forthcoming with how far along she was, if she had prenatal care. So we just weren't aware how pregnant she really was. And she actually went into labor over into the night and delivered that baby about 6:30 a.m. in Miracle Hill in our bathroom, in the cold weather portion bathroom of the mission. And we had ladies that were there at the time that were helping her deliver that baby. We had called 911. 911 was en route to get there, but that baby was determined that it was going to be born at Miracle Hill and was born there.
How are the mother and the baby doing today?
That baby was 9 pounds, 7 ounces, very healthy, and mother is doing really well.
How long ago was this?
That was around Christmas time.
Okay. So that's not a small baby to be birthing outside of a hospital.
No, and that was baby number 7 for her.
Okay. And was she alone, or did she have some of the other kids with her?
She was alone.
Okay. And so she's doing good. Baby's doing good.
She's doing really well.
Okay. Is she working? Has she figured out childcare?
She has been on 3 interviews so far and is hopeful to start working in the next 2 weeks.
Good. Praise the Lord. So let's walk through some of the reasons why a mother would enter into a shelter setting. What are the main contributing factors?
The number one I would say was bad relationships. Generally, women are nurturers by nature and want to hold on to relationships by any means necessary, which is not necessarily the most healthy thing. And when the relationship ends, you have no place to go and you have children in tow. So it's difficult. Another instance is just based on the experience with COVID. COVID shut everything down, and we had lots of women that were not able to work because the school shut down and children were having to be homeschooled, and it was difficult for them to go back into the workforce, and they weren't able to pay mortgages. They weren't able to pay for their apartment, and they were evicted.
Yeah, that is a really common story and a piece of, we've talked about on the podcast before, that when the government sends your kids home, may not affect you, but it's affecting 60% of our population who have to work.
Absolutely. And when you have multiple children that are not of age that they can stay home by themselves, that makes it entirely a whole new ball game for that mother.
Yeah, I heard a story through COVID of DSS got called in because they were doing e-learning, Zoom learning, whatever they called it. And a teacher had seen these kids Zooming from the back seat of a car. And the reason was the mother had to go to work in order to pay rent. And so DSS is now threatening to take her children from her when she's doing everything she knows how to do to provide for those children. It's just a lose-lose situation.
Absolutely. We have had several instances where we've had mothers that didn't have money to pay for Wi-Fi as well, and had DSS called on them saying that the child was truant because they didn't have access to log in to do schoolwork. So that was another factor as well.
So what are some of the other contributing factors that a mom would show up with her kids?
Fleeing from addiction relationships or trying to maintain custody of their children due to their addictive behaviors is another one as well.
Okay, so addiction plays a role, and kind of the mind being divided. On one hand, they want to be a mom. On the other hand, they're in slavery to a substance of some sort.
Absolutely. And I think for most mothers, once DSS has stepped in, that's when a choice has to be made, whether I'm going to decide to do what's best for myself or what's best for my children. Majority of women want to do what's best by their children. The drug just has become their slave, and they can't beat the addiction without the relationship with the Lord.
So in the general population of those experiencing homelessness, we see a large percentage who are struggling with mental illness. Is that a factor for mothers as well?
Absolutely. That is a struggle that we face daily with our parenting skills, as far as trying to teach them how to be better versions of parents because of mental illness. I think there is a stigma that is associated with therapy and seeking mental health. We do have an awesome mental health facility in Gaffney that will provide the care. It's just getting them through the doors, because a lot of them, they feel like the system has failed them and they don't trust anybody that's in the system, and it's harder to break down that barrier to seek the mental health.
So we recently had our annual fundraising banquet, and we had a family on stage. It was a mother and her kids who had been in another one of our shelters. And my favorite comment from the whole banquet came from one of the boys, and he was probably 10 years old. And the question was something to the effect of, what was your experience? And he said, it was really tough. Living in a shelter was very hard. He talked about the positive relationships that he had, but at the end of the day, nobody wants to be at a shelter. No mom wants to take her kids to a shelter. Absolutely. But they're certainly grateful that it's there when they need it. What does it look like? What does life look like for a mom and her kids in shelter? How do they sleep? What are they eating? Things like that.
It is a totally different environment because we have 3 structured meals a day, whereas in a home time setting, it's mostly you can snack all day long. You can't do that at the mission. We have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and they're not allowed back into the cafeteria. That's hard for a child that's used to having a snack when they get out of school, or a midday morning snack. Those things are tough. It's also tough having different structure. We have a 9 o'clock bedtime for our children, all children at the mission, no matter what age. It's hard for a 15-year-old to understand that 9 o'clock is the set bedtime, whereas at home, I've kind of been a free-for-all where I can kind of maintain and wake up for school no matter what time I go to bed. We don't allow that at the mission. There's lots of changes and structure that is set in place, and it is very difficult for a child. We have a small playground area outside for the children, but they basically don't really have that avenue to burn off that energy when it's time to come inside the building, because you can't really run wild and screaming inside the building when there's other ladies and there's other children in the building.
As a side note, those kids that are going to bed at 9, probably the most rested kids in school.
Absolutely.
Right? Like they may actually have a shot at learning.
Absolutely.
So what is this, we're congregate care facilities, meaning a lot of people in the same room. What does the sleeping arrangements look like for moms and kids?
It's actually a community type living. If you've ever been inside a college dorm, you know that there's bunk beds. Well, we have bunk beds and trundle beds. So for smaller children that we wouldn't necessarily trust to be on a top bunk, there's a trundle bed that pulls out underneath so that those children can sleep down there and still be near their parent. It's also difficult to have children that are on different sleep schedules when you have infant children that have changing times different during the night, that have bottle feeding times different during the night. It is extremely hard for parents to get along when they're very cranky and not had enough rest. or children that wake up multiple times during the night to have to go potty that need to turn on the light to go potty. It's just, it's a different environment, and we try to make it work as best as we can, but it is certainly challenging when you have multiple children and multiple families in that room.
What are some of the other challenges that they experience?
Parenting. You have 3 mothers that are sharing a space, and you have 3 separate parenting styles, where you have this mother that is a stern disciplinarian that will put you in timeout, and then you have another mother who's a lot more lenient on her children, and this mom is telling her, well, you need to do this and you need to parent this way. That is extremely difficult. It's almost like adult daycare during times like that, where the mothers are in disagreement with themselves on parenting skills.
So, I think no matter what way you shake it, for a kid, being in a shelter setting has the potential to be traumatizing for them.
Absolutely.
Right?
I generally tell all of the other female guests to give the kids and the mothers 7 days to adjust. Generally, within those 7 days, they are adjusting to the structure, they're adjusting to the environment, they're adjusting to having to go to church. Some of those kids have never been to church, have never been introduced to a formal devotion type setting, and that's extremely difficult as well for a child to sit well behaved and listen to a speaker. So within those 7 days, God does what he does best, and he changes the hearts of the parents, and he changes the hearts of the children to become a lot more receptive.
I got kids that don't know anything but church, and they're often not easily behaved in a church service, right? Can't imagine if they've never been before. What about birthdays, holidays? What does that look like?
Those are probably the most challenging. While at the mission, I had a little boy that just did not understand. He wanted a birthday party. And we weren't able to do that in the mission setting because we have separate dining between males and females. So what we did was we planned a time out back where the playground was. We got cupcakes, and we did look a little small party for him to be able to have some sense of normalcy to have a birthday party. But it's hard for them to understand at Christmas as well. I'm very thankful for the community in Cherokee County that will help go above and beyond to meet the needs of the children, because all of their needs are generally met. I will have them to come up with a generic little Christmas list. We don't do a lot of toys because we just don't have the space for that. I will let them usually pick about 1 or 2 toys, and all of those needs are generally met. And for some of them, that is a first because they haven't had that even in the home. Usually for Easter, we have a couple of churches that will come in and transport the moms with the children to Easter egg hunts and things like that, and they're able to have that little piece of normalcy. But it is extremely challenging at Christmas and at Thanksgiving because they would much rather be with their families during that time.
Sure. How do volunteers play a part in that?
A lot of our volunteers that come become so attached to our children that they make sure that they are very attentive to their needs, as far as even when they get report cards. They want to know what the person made on their report cards. They come in, they bring treat bags, they bring after school snacks for the children. They're very attentive because they realize that the children are the ones that generally suffer the most because they don't have the sense of normalcy that normal kids would in their home setting.
Yeah. So I think outside of the normalcy and the trauma that they may have experienced and or are experiencing, education is probably the last thing on their minds. I mean, Absolutely. It's hard to focus on your homework when you don't know where you're going to sleep that night. How does education happen? I mean, certainly they're still going to school.
Generally, what happens is there's a shift. For our children, they've never made honor roll generally. Generally, when they come to the mission and we have like after school time, they get a snack and they immediately start homework. Grades start increasing. They start making honor roll. We had 2 kids that made beta club and had no clue that you had to have black dress pants and a white shirt and a tie to be inducted into that program. And we made it happen for them. And I think for the parents, they never thought that those things could be achieved because they weren't attainable at home. But the children have shifted the trajectory and have become very more cautious about their education, more cautious about after school sports. And those are things that they generally could not do in the home.
Wow. So when they first check in, they're clearly being uprooted from wherever they have been. How difficult is it to get them plugged back into a school? Do they stay at their old school? How does that work?
In Cherokee County, we have a homeless coordinator, and that's Dr. Ike Wallace, and he is amazing with providing transportation. We usually can get it set up within 24 hours. I will make a trip over to the district office and get it set up. The bus will actually come to our front door and pick them up and return them in the afternoons, which is a blessing for us because we wouldn't have transportation to get them to and from school every day. They provide clothing vouchers for our students as well if they need assistance with clothing, book bags, any type of educational things that they need for school, pencils, notebooks, any of those things, our district will provide it for them.
And for our listeners, that what was the guy's name?
Dr. Ike Wallace.
Dr. Ike Wallace would be the McKinney-Vento coordinator for Cherokee County. Every county has a McKinney-Vento coordinator.
Absolutely.
That is the homelessness coordinator that works on behalf of the school system. And the numbers are shocking of how many kids are experiencing homelessness.
We actually get calls from our school district requesting that children be placed, which was kind of different in the last few years just due to COVID, wanting placement for high school students. Of course, we cannot take them unless they're
Sure.
an emancipated adult, but that was a shift as well, that students were not wanting to stay in the dysfunction of home. They would rather be at a homeless shelter than to be home, which says a lot about that child's character and maturity, that they would rather be in a homeless shelter where there's stability versus a home care setting that there's no stability.
So if not Cherokee County Rescue Mission, where do they go?
Generally, those students are placed in DSS custody, and then DSS will handle it from there.
Find stability for them elsewhere.
Absolutely.
Okay, we talked a little bit about daycare and the challenge that daycare can be if you were in need of it. And you talked some about the ABC vouchers, but those ABC vouchers have some fear associated with them and a stigma that goes with them. So if you've got an opportunity for free childcare out there, why would some moms not want to apply for it?
Because they feel like at that point, if they're going through DSS to get a service, that they might become under investigation, which is not necessarily the truth. Those policies are put in place to assist parents in being better versions of parents and having the assistance that they need to provide for the children. So I think there's a stigma associated with DSS anytime you mention the word for parents that have children in a homeless shelter, because they assume that DSS is going to be involved in a negative way. But DSS has been so supportive of families that are in the mission because they know that they're going to be taken care of.
So if they get the ABC voucher, do they automatically get assigned a caseworker?
No.
Okay, so they may just get the voucher and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
If they do get assigned a caseworker, what does that relationship look like?
Generally, they do site visits, which is they actually just come out to the mission to see how the child is interacting. If the child is thriving, they may visit at the school. They may also do some site visits at daycares also while they're there, just to see how the child is interacting with other children, checking to make sure that the child is able to use the bathroom by themselves. Are they learning to be potty trained? Are they learning how to tie their shoes? Are they able to verbally express themselves versus just pointing to what they need? They're just looking to see if those needs are being met socially as well as physically as well.
Okay. Any other challenges you can think of that a child in care at the mission might face that we haven't covered?
We do have children that come in that have ADHD sometimes and that have severe oppositional defiant behaviors just because of past childhood traumas. And at that point, we will generally recommend them to mental health for some counseling. And if it's through the school system, generally if you reach out to the guidance counselor with the school, she can take over from there and get them connected with the services that they need. We have had speech therapists that can work with children as well during the school systems if they need those things, if the child can't verbally express themselves, because sometimes those are barriers that they haven't had attention to because of neglect.
So you're working in a adult-centric rescue mission, meaning it's designed to help men and women experiencing homelessness. But you've got this added element of children. What is your job as it relates to the mother and the child? Certainly you're there to help the mother with counseling, with case management. What does Miracle Hill do for the kids themselves?
Generally, anytime that I have a mother that comes in, we like to meet face-to-face once a week. And I will do exercises with them. They like to call it homework. I call it exercises, where they're actually learning parenting skills. And it might be this week where you're teaching your child how to brush their teeth. You're teaching your child how to put their clothes in a laundry basket versus throwing them in the floor. So I'm teaching basic parenting skills in addition to trying to spiritually meet the needs of the mother as well, because while they're there, you're going to try to help them to become the best version of a parent that they know how to be. And for some of them, it's generational because they weren't raised the same way. Sure. And they are raising their children the way that they were raised, which is dysfunction on top of dysfunction. And for them, once they start to see that there's an easier way of doing things, it becomes certainly one of their greatest moments for them as a mother to say, hey, he's brushing his teeth on his own now, or he's going potty by himself. So those are lots of the high moments that we have with them as well. And also teaching them that, your kids can't eat junk all day. We have 3 meals that are served. We want to balance out the ratio, because if all your intake is sugar, you're going to have a lot of energy that you don't have a place to burn it off.
Parenting is universal. Like the same things that those mothers are experiencing, the same things that we experience. Like if anybody can figure out how to make a kid stop chewing with his mouth open,
absolutely,
hit me up, because I'm trying to figure it out right now.
Absolutely. We have this little boy right now who's 4 years old, and he is such a joy. But teaching him to use an inside voice has been the hardest thing. He comes in every single day from daycare, and he's screaming at the top of his voice, because that's what they do at daycare. They're competing to see who's the loudest to get the teacher's attention. And when you say inside voice, he immediately now pipes down, and it's a whole different atmosphere. It's funny because Shep loves to say that you can tell when he's in the building because it's so loud.
So if you had a magic wand and you could create something in Cherokee County or across the U.S. that would benefit mothers with children experiencing homelessness, what would you create?
We are actually in the phase of that right now. It was the female transitional house.
Okay.
Since day one, when I walked in Miracle Hill, I began to question Andy, why didn't we have a female transitional house? Because that is a challenge for our mothers, because there's not a lot of housing available if you have multiple children. And for them, when they're using a shared space, it's hard to be a parent when you are looked upon, when you're frowned upon, and everything is critiqued. When you are in your own setting, you can become the best version of yourself that you possibly can be, because you have nobody there to guide you through. You're learning by trial and error. And I think for us, that is going to be the most beneficial thing. I go back to the mom with the 9 kids. It would have been so beneficial for her to parent those kids outside of the mission. It was a challenge with the 9 kids to be able to do that inside a mission setting.
So you're saying by changing the setting, she could have reached stability faster.
Absolutely.
And maybe moved out of care
She would
quicker.
be cooking her own meals.
Yeah.
She would be able to have the freedom to take them outside to play. It wouldn't be as much such a set schedule.
Sure.
She would be able to do homework after school, and it would just be her learning how to be a parent outside of the tradition that we have at the mission.
While still having support from you.
Absolutely.
Okay, so there's going to be listeners out there that are going to be like, man, I had no idea that this is happening in the shelters. What are ways that those listeners can support these kids?
The number one thing would be to try to be involved with the parents and become a mentor. For some of them, they've had mentors, but they haven't been living up to the capability that the person needed. strong women need strong women and mothers to support them along the journey, to tell them it's okay. You're not always going to have a good day. Your kids are going to misbehave. That's part of growing up, and that is not a failure on your part as a parent. I think for the majority of them, they need someone that is Christ-like to pour into their lives, to show them what's right and what's wrong, and to continue to pour the love of Jesus in them so that they can pour the love of Jesus back into their children.
Amen. Other ways that they can get involved.
We always need diapers. We have had multiple infants in our building at the same time. We can always use diapers, wipes, any type of children's clothes. I think a lot of adults bring clothes to the mission for adults, for men and women, but they forget about children. So that's a struggle as well from different season to season, is making sure that their needs are met. So any children's clothes, any children's shoes. We do not need toys at this time because we are kind of overcrowded. But any type of books, any type of VeggieTales activities that are Christian based, we would be happy to have those things.
Certainly they can pray.
Absolutely.
They can support the mission or Miracle Hill in general financially.
Absolutely.
And they can look for other volunteer opportunities. Maybe you don't feel called to mentoring, but you could come and cook some meals or make snacks. Absolutely. Or whatever the case may be. Anything else that you feel like our listeners need to know about the experience of homelessness for kids in a shelter?
To just be mindful of how we judge people, because I think a lot of times we judge homelessness in association with addiction, but a lot of our mothers do not struggle with addiction. They struggle with bad choices and relationships and generational trauma as well. And to treat those mothers the same way that you would want your daughter or your son to be treated if they were in need of any type of help, and to continue to pray for them as well, because the journey that they've just started is definitely probably one of the hardest journeys that they've ever been on, but it will be the most fulfilling journey if they continue to walk with Jesus.
Amen. Thank you for coming on.
You're welcome.
See, this was painless.
It was. It was.
Would you do us the honor and close us by praying for those kids?
Absolutely. Absolutely. God, we give thanks on this day for just the opportunity to share what we do with the world and to show our love and our respect for what Jesus has already done within us. We thank you for the call, God, that you have placed upon our lives, that you would allow us to continue to walk in the purpose and the path, God, that you have laid before us. We thank you for the ability to help and serve others. We want to be the light, God, that they see daily that reflects you. Our actions and our words, God, we want to line up with who you are, and for them to be able to, in turn, give their hearts and their souls and their minds to you, God. For these innocent children, we ask that you would continue to shelter them in your love, in your grace, and your mercy, that you would allow them to see who you are, God, so that they would continue to seek after you, even into adulthood, so that they can walk into the calling and the purpose, God, that you have placed upon their lives. We thank you, we love you, and we honor you on this day. Amen.
Amen. Thank you again.
You're welcome.
For our listeners, subscribe, comment, let us know what we can do to answer your questions or make this a better experience for you. Goodbye, everybody.
See you later.